The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining. So welcome to our little webinar here, your no-risk flight plan to the cloud. We're going to get started here, and this is recorded. And if you have any questions, please, we'll have some time to answer those later, but that window at any time. So let's get started. So to introduce myself, I'm Jason Cornelia. I left Microsoft earlier this year as the CTO of the America's Worldwide Center of Excellence for Cloud and Data Center. So that very long name was a group of kind of elite architects that traveled the globe deploying cloud and data center type solutions based on a Microsoft stack in some cases. Deployed and designed solutions in lots of global locations, needless to say, plenty of frequent flyer miles. Main expertise in retail, healthcare, financial services, and manufacturing. And then there's some other activities that I've done as well in my LinkedIn profile if you have any more questions about me. So to get started, and let's kind of jump right in. So why a flight plan? So we kind of in dirty laundry, but we kind of talked internally of, what's a good way to phrase this, how we do what we do. And we kept coming back to roadmap, but the challenge is a roadmap doesn't really take you to the cloud. Roadmap kind of keeps you on the ground. And so with a roadmap, it tends to be, if you've been in IT for a while, it tends to be very rigid. And in that rigidity, unfortunately, there's a lot of course corrections that have to happen when it comes to the positive. I mean, aren't always a negative. They're generally a positive thing, those course corrections, because you kind of fail fast and you learn fast. Plan is very synonymous with DevOps and that continuous deployment. Once you build a flight plan, that plan generally has already been established. If there's any pilots, I know I'm well oversimplifying it, but essentially that's the same when it comes to DevOps and continuous deployment, which we'll get into as well. So where do we start? So starting today, just to set the frame of where your head might be at, is kind of what's your organization's narrative, right? So what's your roadmap? What's your flight plan? And it comes in varying stages and formats. Some organizations have had it laid out by their CIO that we will be a cloud-first company. Not really sometimes knowing what that means, but understanding how we get there. It tends to be a challenge to figure out what is that kind of proactive steps, or what's that pragmatic in my organization to be that cloud-first mentality. So we're going to talk about some technicals, some non-technicals, and how we get there. To set the stage properly, what I've kind of put up here is some of the, I like to start with kind of the art of the possible. Generally, we don't go to cloud just because we want to go to the cloud. There's some sort of project thing that's happening to make that happen. And these are what the cloud enables. That sometimes it would be a struggle to do in an on-prem data center, or at least do as if you could in the cloud. A couple quick ones to call out, for example, are persistent driver profiles. Right? So with a driver profile in the cloud, your seat, your radio, your wheel, your lights, as you step into that vehicle, the rental vehicle, your wife's vehicle, your husband's vehicle, or your kid's vehicle, those settings follow you where you go. Right? Once you pair your phone with the vehicle itself, everything's set up for you and follows you where you go. And eventually that'll probably include autonomous driving profiles as well. So the cloud kind of enables that solution that we might not be able to do or want to do on-prem. Another one, too, is consortium data centers. So a lot of organizations have a community outreach program, hackathons, educational facilities. Those are good activities that you may not want to put in your existing on-prem data center that make a lot of sense for sort of a cloud time-sharing model in a consortium data center. And those consortium data centers take advantage of managed services, shared fees, as well as cloud shared fees and consumption fees. So it's generally a good model, and again, not something you're going to do in an on-prem data center today. And the last one to talk about that's kind of cool is artificial intelligence-based operations and service management. If you've kept up to speed or seen anything on the bots that are coming out from Microsoft and Facebook, etc., those bots are intended to grow up and grow into be sort of an artificial intelligence communication interface, right? Cognitive learning. And that AI-based ops works very well in ITIL or operations model, depending on where you sit. And essentially, having good knowledge management and service management will feed that into that eventually. So in other words, when a business analyst or consumer of your IT organization calls into the help desk, very simply, they should be able to ask in plain language their question, and the API or AI ops agent will be able to look up and research and create and build tickets based on that. So this is some of the why, right, and how we do it, and some of the reason we'll get into very shortly here. But depending on your organization, some of these key projects can be key revenue drivers, right, and good for the business. So where do we start? So why do we even define a narrative? And if anybody has lived through the virtualization wars, I'll call them, sometimes you have to understand you have to build that narrative first before it's built by others, right? And cloud is one of those transformational things that if you're not careful will be built by others, right? And these are comments I've heard directly from IT pros, from even IT directors in general, and that cloud leads to job loss, right? If you don't need me or you won't need me or what I do if we move to the cloud. Or because we move to the cloud, we're locked in, right? We have to go with that vendor for life. Security immaturity. So sometimes we tend to over-secure environments when we don't understand them, and cloud is one of them. If you think of it as an extension of your data center and extending that security model, that tends to make more sense than over-securing the environment to the point it's unusable. And then, quite honestly, I met with a financial institution, and their first comment was, we don't do things first, and I'm really okay with that, but they said we generally don't do things till 4 or 5 years out when it's been proven. And unfortunately with cloud, that's not the opportunity that exists. It's happening much, much faster than anyone expected. So you don't have to be bleeding edge, but there's some quick steps you can take to kind of drive that adoption quickly. And so to kind of change that narrative, and if you've seen this before, I apologize, but this is kind of one of my favorite charts to put up because it's extremely accurate when describing how we drive a change in your organization. Without proper vision, sometimes there's a lot of confusion, right? Again, the CIO saying we're going to cloud first. Well, what does that mean? What's the vision of that look like? Skills, right? If our professionals in our organization don't possess the skills yet to do that, it creates anxiety, right? A lack of understanding. Without incentive, change is very, very slow to happen. And in the cloud world, it needs to happen a lot faster than it would in an on-prem world. Proper resourcing of resources, and without an action plan, generally it's a lot of false starts. Right? We have a couple of projects that kick off and die and never get picked back up. And so when you understand how to change the narrative, this is the plan at a very high level, which we're happy. The kind of plan that we put forward in order to get you to move to cloud or get your organization to a cloud environment. Excuse me. So on the non-technical side, you're looking at a timeline of probably 3 to 6 months. And if you've been in IT a while, you know that any project that takes 3 to 6 months sometimes isn't transformational, cause a lot of change, isn't that big a deal sometimes. It's the 5-year projects that we worry about. But that's about as long as it takes on a non-technical aspect to get where your organization may want to go. On a technical level, it's even shorter. 4 to 6 weeks, we can have you migrating and moving workloads to the cloud and making things happen in a cloud environment to get to that true cloud-first model. And so we'll dive deeply here in the next 45 minutes or so into what those things look like. And again, we only have 45 minutes, so what you're getting is a very compressed or so, depending on the organization size, into 45 minutes. So with that, there's some depth we can go into later. So let's start with the strategy part of it, right? Without a good strategy, we don't know where we're going to go. So what you're seeing here, and I can't take credit for this, so at Cranfield University School of Management, there's something called a business dependency network in part of their methodologies. And this business dependency network allows you to map them directly to business drivers and business benefits. And as nice is generally an ROI. And that's a good part of it. Don't get create a hardline map as to what an organization's overall business objectives are. Right. So these investment really come straight out of a 10K report or that you can pull out yourselves or have access to internally to your organization. This is something that we can help you build as well to make sure that whatever technology you may be deploying or expecting to utilize maps directly to a business driver. If you're a CIO, that's what's critical, right? I mean, at that level, you're trying to understand what those business drivers are and what the IT barriers are to get there. This will drive out very quickly and accurately what that looks like. So in that model, we kind of take a look at your maturity where you're at in regards to the cloud as well. So what stage do you feel you're at? And this is, again, goes along with that narrative, right? And so if you're a cloud watcher organization, kind of watching how things develop, haven't really dove into anything yet, maybe had a few vendors in for a conversation or two, cloud starters are doing something, right? A proof of concept, an initial cloud project, maybe migrate a workload or two, but want to gain experience in order to determine kind of what those future projects look like. Cloud explorers have multiple projects and are kind of on that first path of cloud first by applications having already been deployed. Cloud explorers are focused on improving and expanding that existing cloud resource, right, and how to optimize it. Cloud focused are definitely cloud focused or cloud first organizations. So they're heavily using cloud principles and they're looking to optimize operations and as well as minimize the cost in operating their cloud directly. So I get asked quite a bit, what's the speed of cloud? I walk into a lot of organizations where their cloud strategy is 4 to 5 years, 2 to 3 years, and multi-year strategies for cloud are years too long. Today's cloud strategies are 6 to 12 months tops and should be reviewed quarterly for viability and course correction. Enhancements are generally added on a monthly or weekly basis, and that's something that a lot of IT folks aren't used to. We're used to software releases or license updates or feature updates, 18 months, 3 years, maybe every year if you're lucky. Cloud enhancements are added on a monthly or even a weekly basis. Just yesterday, Microsoft sent out, if you're in Azure already, sent a list of all the things that went global, and there was about 8 new products, and then I think there was 10 or 12 new features that just went global availability. And that's how quickly cloud changes when you take the hardcore infrastructure out of the equation, and we'll get into the benefits of that too. So where do you start? How do you build this cloud strategy? And very simply, it's connect, resource, and execute. So those kind of 3 buckets of activities is where your most bang for your buck is when you get started building that cloud strategy. And there's a couple in there to call out, right? So network connectivity is key, right? Essentially, that's your freeway, if you will, to connect to your cloud resources. So network connectivity is critical when moving to the cloud. Internal marketing is a big one. Trying to get your consumers within your organization to understand what we're building and why is a big deal. Going to the cloud, again, brings a lot of anxiety when there's not a lot of understanding. And making sure that everyone understands how we're doing it, what the approach is, how we are answering those challenges early, make a big difference. And then, of course, security prep, and we'll talk about kind of what internal billing is and what that may look like for your organization. Second is resourcing. So resource definitions, people allocations, resource templates, and we're going to get into how to build at a very simple level your own application or orchestration matrix. And then what is a cost boundary versus a barrier. The last one is execute. So application migrations, right, VM migrations, honestly, execute means just do something. The worst thing you can do in a cloud strategy is stagnate and do nothing. Analysis paralysis is your worst enemy when you're building out or executing on a cloud strategy, because by the time you've analyzed, you're paralyzed by the changes that have already happened. So it's just understanding that this is a parallel strategy to execute in the cloud. So next step would be operationally. Right? How do you operationalize a cloud? And I get this question constantly because it is vastly different than operating an on-prem data center today. And the goal in going forward with that strategy is to build boundaries, not barriers. So a narrative of barrier is kind of what you can't do, right? And that's what we tend to do in IT, right? You can't deploy VMware, you can't deploy Hyper-V, you can't run Windows, you can't run Linux, you can't do this, you can't do that. And we tend to put those barriers up only because we're trying to protect ourselves from the problems that come along with that. The narrative of boundary is what you can do. And I apologize if you're not from the Detroit area. I'm a Lions fan, so I kind of sneak those things in when I can. But if you look at a football field, right, that you can do certain things permitted within those boundaries. As long as you don't go out of bounds, you can run as far as you want without getting tackled. So that boundary is a narrative of what you can do, not what you can't do. And in IT, what we're trying to build with this new cloud and a new operational model is create a narrative of what you can do by building boundaries. And we'll get into kind of what that means here very shortly. So from a cloud operations level, some of the core ITIL, COBIT, whatever your methodology of choice is, those operations, what you need at a default or just to get off the ground is a CMDB, a service catalog, and some sort of cost recovery or showback model, and we'll get into what that looks like. Some of the enablers for that are resource pools, and we'll show you very quickly here an application classification methodology, and extreme standardization and what that entails. So when it comes to financial management of your IT assets, you don't have to do a showback model or even a chargeback model or any of this. However, what gets missed when you skip this step is that this model is a key cultural driver to change your organization. When your consumers understand what services they're using, how much they cost, whether or not you're charging back for that, tends to make them understand better what exactly you're deploying or what exactly they're deploying and what the impact of that is. So for example, we don't need to have a dollar amount as a chargeback model, right? I worked within a lot of organizations that would use something such as quota points. One organization even used quota coins or coins, and you could buy coin-operated activities, right? And say, you know, for points, you could say $1,000 of IT budget actually equals 1 quota point, right? So you can assign a development group 100 points to deploy and destroy any sort of asset that they want, right? So let's say that you have a virtual machine of a certain size and it's 2 quota points. Those 2 quota points, they can deploy, you know, 50 of them. If they want a larger one that's 4 points, they're going to have to take a few down to build a new one or go try and get more budget. And providing that kind of methodology actually makes it simple for your consumers to understand what they need to do and what your barriers are. Also allows extreme predictability, right? If I understand how my resources are laid out, how these quote-unquote points are laid out, it makes it simple to extend and forecast what my capabilities, what my cost model looks like. Lastly, reporting is probably a key component of that cultural shift and this cost model. So for example, there's a functional report that we build in engagement sometimes called the Frost report. And essentially it's a report that every 30 days, 60 days, whatever it may be, and this is on-prem or in the cloud, of resources that are underutilized, right? Less than 5% utilization, haven't been logged into in 30 days, whatever that function may be. Essentially these are resources that have gone cold. No one's using, but yet you're paying for them. And in on-prem, that's kind of a sunk cost, right? I mean, you pay your $400 a month for a VM or whatever it may be, but in the cloud you pay per working hour. And so with 744 working hours a month, if that resource can be shut off half the time, it's a 50% cost savings. And these reports aren't intended as a shaming activity or anything like that. They're intended as educational. These are resources, as us and IT see it, that you could be taking better advantage of, right? This is your budget you could free up to do other things. And then heat reports are more of a proactive model, where actually we're showing how hot a resource is running, or maybe we need to look at scaling out or scaling in or scaling somewhere for these resources that are running hot. And these are data points that your organizations you work with want to know about. And if you're providing that data proactively, it's a good cultural shift to show that IT is actually an enabler, not an inhibitor. And that's really what we're trying to do. Now this slide I generally only throw up for a virtualization or data center type model. However, the reason it comes into play here is that on the quote-unquote t-shirt model size that you see there, that white space on-prem only means of things we can deploy more or more services we can provide because it's unused resources. In the cloud, that translates just directly to money. So essentially that white space, the more you can turn things off, the more money that you save. And it's really hard to grasp that and understand that going from an on-prem environment for the last 25 years sometimes to a cloud environment. And we'll get into kind of how you take advantage of that. But first, we got to talk about the automation matrices or the orchestration matrix. So to start with this one, so what you're seeing here, and if you're a CISSP, I apologize, I've liberated some content here. You're seeing a scale that's implied as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And those are key terms in the CISSP or security community. And essentially what we've done is we've made a CIA model where at level 1, for confidentiality as an example, No encryption or data discovery requirements, right? So think of a lunch menu app. That lunch menu app isn't critical. If it goes down, we'll survive. It doesn't cost us anything if it goes down. It's just annoying, right? There's no encrypted data. We're not taking transactions. We're not doing credit cards or PCI or HIPAA. So we could probably rank that as a 1, 1, 1 across the board. And if you take your entire application portfolio and tie a, in this case, as a very simple example, a 3-digit number to it, it sort of changes the conversation. So take the example of I have a new application coming on and we have this methodology applied. I can go through and ask some very straightforward business questions, not just technical, to determine what the 3-digit code or ranking of that application is. So for example, let's say we're bringing on a new credit card transactional app. And so clearly it's got PCI compliance for confidentiality. It's a level 3. If this goes down, we lose X million dollars a day. So it's a 3 for availability. We don't have a good failover. We can't do paper. We're an e-commerce site, right? So we can't do paper process. So for integrity, we have no business continuity process that's not digital. So it's a 3. So now I've asked the right questions to determine which pool of infrastructure that resource will land on. So if I take the same methodology and apply it to my infrastructure pools or my resource pools, in this case we bubble it up very high, which it can go very deep to. You could break it down to Hyper-V cluster or specific rack in a data center. There's lots of ways you could go with it. But in this case we kept it high levels for the example's sake. So our internal data center supports up to a 333 in that scale. Maybe our dev test cloud, because of supportability or because of who has access to it, our contractors, only supports a 111, and so on. And so because this application is a 333 and we know its requirements, we can very easily say it can only go in our public cloud environment or our internal data center. That's the only 2 places. The other ones don't even show up on the list when they go to provision. Creating that matrix allows you to start to automate activities. And that's where a lot of the failure or false starts happen when you're automating activities, is that takes you from true scripting to automation, is that being able to identify a resource and where it can go in an automated fashion with some business intelligence behind it gets you to an orchestrated environment. So just to drive that example home, again, that product catalog app that I have that's a 111 can sit on every single one of these environments, right? I mean, they all support up to a 111, or I mean up to minimally the 111 as a base requirement. So it can go anywhere. However, my order entry application, which is a 333, can only go on internal data center or public cloud. And again, creating that matrix helps create a baseline of understanding of who goes what and where and why. And it's something that is also a cultural driver, because you can't really argue with that. I mean, it's kind of the rules of how we operate our business. So anything outside of that, if someone wants to say bring online a separate new resource, great. We tie a 3-digit code to it, and we can use that as a resource pool going forward. And again, this is something that we can identify and go in and say, okay, what are all your resource pools? What does this model look like? Maybe your model is not 3 levels, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 9. I mean, I wouldn't recommend 9, it could get a little complicated at that point, but generally having some sort of very well-defined matrix, whether it's in depth or not, will help you get to a very automated fashion very quickly. So the other part of the non-technical side is to talk about the organization. Right, and what changes do we have to make organizationally to enable a cloud environment to happen very quickly? And what you're seeing here is kind of the traditional enterprise versus the agile enterprise. And I've done a lot of work in both. And the traditional enterprise generally has a separate networking, storage, and server team. And that's okay, but they usually operate independently too. ITSM tends to be a side project, or we're just introducing some sort of ITIL or ITSM type of capability. And when I say ITSM, I apologize for that acronym. What I mean is IT Service Management. And the largest reason that traditional enterprises tend to fall down in the cloud is that the best IT pros have no time to engineer or innovate because they're too busy putting out fires. They're too caught up in operations to make changes to the environment or positive changes to the environment. And generally projects stall from red tape or bureaucracy. And sometimes IT, let's face it, can be seen as a hindrance rather than an asset. Right, creating barriers instead of boundaries. So what we want this environment to look like is an agile enterprise narrative, right, which is My architecture, my engineering, and my operational teams have constant feedback loops and are accountable and empowered to enhance IT. My network storage and compute teams become capacity and capability providers. In other words, I don't need to care if I need RAID 10 storage. I know that's my base level of service. I just need 8 gig of SSD for some reason, right? Or I should say 8 terabyte of SSD to make it legitimate, but that 8 terabyte of SSD, my storage team know, here's what I need to do to make that happen, right? Automated runbooks provide audible and predictable SLAs. We'll get into what that means in a few other slides here. And then IT essentially becomes a frictionless, critical business asset providing unparalleled speed to market. And let's face it, agility is the new risk, right? If you can't be agile, if you can't move fast enough, speed to market is the new risk factor. It's not whether it'll go down or whether it's redundant. It's can we get this service out there fast enough to make a difference in the business. Now, I put this one out here, and there's a book out there called Team of Teams. I don't recommend a lot of business books, and you'll see why. I'll talk about that shortly here soon too. But essentially, on Team of Teams, it's changing our organization so that instead of tasks rolling up, instead of tasks rolling down and status is rolling up, and there's more reporting than actual activity, and success is being based on the top of the hierarchy, based on pure results, serial task management, etc. A team of teams, that teamwork becomes organic, right? And tasks are assigned to specific teams to complete how they see fit, and they're accountable for those tasks as a team, right? Not one singular individual is accountable, but the entire team. And so it promotes a good teamwork level of success. Promotes parallel task management, right? If you have multiple teams executing multiple activities in different streams, generally you can manage that better and run better in a parallel fashion rather than data in, data out, or input out when it comes to deploying tasks to organizations. And again, that's something that we go into in a greater depth in a workshop or an engagement directly, right? So the other part is become a business partner, right? And that's for IT groups. Some may think they are, some are, and some are not at all. And how you become a better business partner is consistent service delivery, right? Continual deployment, consistent service delivery, building the confidence that your IT organization is going to be able to accomplish what that group wants. And we live in a world now where infrastructure is code, right? In a cloud world, to get storage, a network, a server, it's an API call, it's a PowerShell call. And so when you can consistently deliver those results and provide the confidence that it's easy for you to get those resources and wrap your controls around them so that you can deliver them quickly, the business will respond to that in the most positive way you can find. Agile service delivery, internal marketing, again, an awareness of what's going on and what we're building in the business terms is the best approach that you can make to drive a better relationship with your business partners. And again, boundaries, not barriers. Right? I can't stress that enough, that we build boundaries to allow our groups to work in rather than barriers of what they can't do. And lastly, we focus on the business problems, not the technical. Our business generally does not care that VMware needs these 4 patch upgrades. What they care about is, will it be down? How long will it be down for while we do that? And it's the same with cloud, right? What business problems can we solve by piecing together certain components of those 88 products there, or how many ever it is that fit in that suite of Azure to make that happen, right? Is it a piece of infrastructure for a server, platform as a service for a website, analytics out of data lake? I mean, there's so many ways you can do that now. It's really putting those pieces together, which we're going to talk about too. So this is kind of admittedly one of my favorite slides, and it's because where we sit in a cloud environment today in a technology space, it's very much more of an art than a science. Today in a data center, we know the bits and bytes, we know what it takes to make 8 terabyte of storage happen at 10,000 IOPS, for example. In the cloud, we have a methodology to do that too. The difference is, with infrastructure being code now, there's probably 99 different ways we can do it. And so knowing the best way to do that for your organization, for what objective you're trying to accomplish, is where the art comes in. And we'll kind of get into why that's the case too, at least for the time being. So what you're seeing on this slide is kind of what cloud scale or hyperscale means to today's technology sets. And their size, their scale, there's redundancy versus resiliency, primary and backup, active and active. The main one I've highlighted that I want to call out is system admin. System admin tasks going forward are going to be less about a UI and more about an API. And that doesn't mean that as IT professionals we need to understand or know how to write code exactly, but we need to be able to understand and read it and understand the rigor around it. And we're going to talk about that too here in a second. But that's a very big change that's happening. And if you've dealt with Azure or the cloud, the portal that you're seeing is probably only 30%, maybe 40% tops of the functionality that exists. The rest of it and everything that you probably want to do exists in an API or a PowerShell call or some function that is not a GUI. So it's something to be aware of that we have to prep our organizations for as we move forward and want to move quicker in the cloud. The reason we call it out also is that we're shifting our skill sets from engineering Legos, in other words, rather than building these Legos to the exact dimension, the exact size as we would in a data center, as we would build a storage array, or as we would build a fiber closet, or whatever it may be, we're using those pieces now to build solutions. And so we don't have to engineer or over-engineer those solutions anymore. We can build the pieces that exist out of the solution. So for example, there is a application that's coming online, your standard web application, or 3-tier, N-tier application, web app, and database. In an on-prem environment, we have to know, are we going to put them in a web farm? Are we going to put them on their own web server? Are we going to create a VM for them? Are we going to put them in our application farm? Are they going to share the J2E environment, whatever it may be? Are they going to sit in a shared database platform? What do we have to engineer on the database side to make this happen? Stored procedures, calls, etc. In a cloud environment, it's more of capacity than anything else. It's an activity. So on that same environment, how many users do we expect to hit that website? Great. We can expect this size of platform that we need to scale out. And if it's not big enough, that's okay. We can easily throw a PowerShell script at it that says when it hits this size or this performance metric, scale out 2 more instances. Same on the application side. Same on growing this database and storage side. So we can react a lot quicker in the cloud to our solutions, even if we built them below spec or above spec. We can react a lot quicker. So you have to understand how to take those Legos that have already been engineered for you and that are predictable and build them into a solution that you want or that you want to create to deploy the business. So what we have to do too is go from admins and engineers to InfraDevOps. Now I'm sure everybody here has heard of DevOps and what DevOps is, but essentially DevOps is a term that came out of an Agile conference in 2008. Essentially what it means is just get development stuff quicker. And the reason that we tend to call it InfraDevOps here is that we don't like that infrastructure stuff being left behind. Right? It's still critical. There's still going to be pieces of it everywhere. For the foreseeable future, we're going to live in a hybrid world, not a full 100% cloud world. And so you have to understand those core infrastructure pieces at some level in order to integrate them with the cloud. And so in this new world, we call them flex engineers or cloud engineers. They have different functions than they would today of either adding storage or removing storage. They're actually approving tenants and services, forecasting environment capacity, building consumer solutions offerings, building new automation and workflows. There's a lot of these activities that these new resources are going to do going forward that make a big difference in an agile infrastructure environment. So what does an InfraDevOps resource look like? What does that skill set look like? If you're looking at your organization and saying, okay, how do I move to that resource or how do I get that resource? This is a very high level as an example. Don't take this as gospel, but generally on the infrastructure side, you're going to want a level of understanding on network, storage, servers, virtualization, and very, very soon here, containerization. On the development side, it's not about being a developer, it's understanding the rigor that goes around code development, right? So, making sure that we're putting in source code repository, commenting out what we want. All those activities are critical to understanding the development piece of that asset that you're building, which as you build cloud-based deployments, those assets are manageable that you need to maintain, right? Operationally, you need to understand problem management, incident, some change control, operational activities. So as you're building out automated deployments, continuous deployments, automated resourcing, your operational activities are included in there by default and hopefully automated out enough that they're a reporting activity instead of a time-consuming activity. So that last step in the non-technical is optimization. And you really have to understand what we're optimizing and why. So I mentioned earlier that white space, right, is cost savings, right? There are, and I referred to it earlier, there's 744 working hours in a month in Azure. And a lot of your resources are billed per hour. So a virtual machine, let's say a virtual machine costs, I don't know, $30 a month or $50 a month, whatever that number is. If you turn it off for half of those 744 hours, it costs $25 a month instead of $50. And that simple math is where all your savings comes in. So once you move to the cloud, we don't want to just lift and shift. We want to optimize either on the way or when we get there. In this computing demand pattern, everything you see above that line in every one of those charts is savings. Right? In an on-prem data center, those savings aren't there. You don't save any money by turning that resource off today because it's a sunk cost. In the cloud, that savings opportunity is huge, especially for an application that maybe only works 8 to 5, right? Why is it up in the evenings? Is it just for backup? Can we leave one server of that entire instance up just to make sure it's backed up? Right? What are the optimizations we can put in place? And what we do as part of our projects and moving you to the cloud or migrating your workloads to the cloud is include this optimization out of the gate. Right? Because to do it as a follow-up activity, we run into we're too busy to make innovations. So we make sure we include those as we go forward. Now, something to understand is that there's savings there, but there's also other optimization models for computing as well. For example, I can scale up, scale out, or scale in. So when I scale in, as Azure Stack releases or these other technologies that allow to run cloud workloads on-prem sort of seamlessly, scaling in may be a good activity to actually control the cost. So for example, we're running a Super Bowl ad campaign. And in that ad campaign, all of our resources are just taking off, right? They're 98% utilized. Users can't get on. Maybe it makes sense to add scale and we scale in, right? So we actually bring some of those resources or add to the load balancing model some of our on-prem resources to actually fire that up. Right, and provide those local resources or offload to that. Another way to do that is event-driven actions. Right, so maybe we scale up the environment or turn on the environment as more people log in, or as utilization gets higher, or time boundaries, or at a certain date, or maybe based on alert. Right, so it depends on how we do that. But again, with infrastructure as code, we can do event-driven actions. Another one is a follow-the-sun global model. So, for example, in some organizations, I can't remember what industry they're in, but in some organizations, it makes sense that they may have an Australian presence, for example. And in Australia, they use the exact same application as they do in the US. So what we end up doing is, rather than having both those environments up 24/7, we'll actually turn on the US environment while at the same time we're spinning down the Australian environment so that cost stays consistent. And we can populate an entire environment that's a complete replica in the Australian region of Azure, and at the same time, when it's not in use, turn it off, thus reducing the cost. So you're paying the same cost as a 24/7 global environment without having to double your cost of operating the environment. And again, these are all optimizations that we will drive through and help you understand as we build out your strategy in going to the cloud. So I like to talk about this one because the best way to understand it is sort of what I call the water tower effect. And what happens is, and I have some of my misspent youth where I actually belonged to a water and sewer board. I wanted to make a difference, and that was the only board position that was open. So I was on a water and sewer board, and I learned a lot, let's put it that way. Besides the politics, I learned quite a bit. And for those of you that are outside of Michigan, it may be where you're at, but in Michigan, most of the local suburbs buy their water from the city of Detroit. And the city of Detroit will take your water bill and they will determine what your rate is based on peak. So they will take the hottest day of the year where everybody's filling their pools and running sprinklers and say, yep, that's what we're billing you on. So we're charging you for, a billion gallons a minute or whatever it may be at a very higher rate. Water towers exist during those peaks. We're pulling from the tower, not from the city, so that we hide those peaks. We flatten them out. And you can think of your on-prem environment in a hybrid cloud environment as your water tower. Right? So when we feel resources are running hot, or maybe we don't want to invest that cost right now out in the cloud, maybe we bring that resource back in. Or in the evenings, maybe we do want it up 24/7, but you know what? The utilization is so low in the evening that we scale it back on-prem. And so that scale in is sort of that water tower effect and a good method to control your costs. And that can be done to a colo, your own data center. It all depends where you want to take it. And so I kind of throw it in there as a good example or analogy of how you can control those costs and how we help you control those costs. The next one, I really don't want to forget about it, is that consumer experience. And this gets lost quite a bit. Sometimes a form or a ticket isn't the best interface for our consumers of our IT services to utilize. And so we want to make sure that we're providing a good self-service experience. We're providing the data points that our consumers want. And again, this isn't defined per, as a consistent white paper that you can go deploy tomorrow. This is very individual per consumer, per organization of what they want. But it's a good metric to show that you're listening to the business and what they want from an IT organization. If they need a resource, if they need something, it's very simple to go do what they want to do and get it from your consumer experience. So just keep that in mind. This is sort of a technical, non-technical issue that we've seen consumer experience completely destroy the opportunity that could exist for a customer moving to the cloud. So let's talk to the technical part, and I'm going to be kind of quick on it on purpose because it generally is a very quick process nowadays. So the challenge is that I've been to lots of organizations over the last 5 years that have tried to deploy cloud. And what you'll see is that it doesn't quite match up with what they expect when they get there. And it's not for lack of trying, it's for lack of interpretation. Our on-premises environments are not operated and don't work like a cloud environment. So we have to look at our consumption model versus a licensing model. We have to look at a lot of different things we generally wouldn't deal with in an on-premises environment. So how do we make that successful and quickly? We start with a good cloud foundation architecture. So the very first thing we do in a cloud engagement is we roll out a subscription, network, and identity strategy and deployment. And if you get those three things right, you will be successful in the cloud. And you essentially have a very future-proof design that as you implement continuous service offerings, these three foundational aspects will help you do that more efficiently. Subscription is a new one, and again, something we don't deal with in an on-prem environment. But if you don't have a good subscription architecture, when you get your billing data, it may be very difficult to interpret who's using what and when and by the hour. There's boundaries. Every subscription actually has a technical boundary of what you can deploy in the subscription, and it has hard limits on purpose. And so those hard limits should be made aware of, especially if you're designing a large-scale service for deployment. So understanding a subscription architecture is very new when it comes to cloud, and understanding that provides you a level of success that you can skip that maturity where others have kind of suffered through. And then clearly network and identity, which are two other key pieces as well. So the question that I always get as we sort of wrap up here is, where do I start? Right? And my answer is always anywhere. Anywhere you can start, do it. If it's backup as a service, right? A lot of our clients and customers don't understand that you don't have to completely move to the cloud whole hog, if you will. Right? You can take your time to get through that. If you have an environment that maybe your backup solution is Azure Backup, right? Maybe we want to find a more efficient cloud backup solution. Do a quick migration, a dev test environment. If you have a DR site, you shouldn't have one anymore. Those are very expensive costs that can be mitigated by a service of a cloud environment. Again, if it's not off, generally you're not being charged for it. And in a DR site, generally your services aren't on. So you can not pay for the site and not pay for the resources for DR. That tends to make sense. Building an innovation lab. A lot of our customers we work with, our innovation officers that we work with, are looking for a place to get innovative, or how do they do that separately from the existing boundaries or barriers they have in their current organization. And a cloud is a great place to build an innovation lab. Branch office. Virtual branch offices or virtual retail stores or virtual healthcare clinics for infrastructure make a lot of sense out in the cloud. You don't generally need as much of them to operate the same level of infrastructure if you can get the same network connectivity to make it local. And again, these are all places you can start, and there's many, many more of these. So out of our, we have something we do, which is a Cloud Foundations engagement, where we'll come in and spend a couple weeks and actually figure out where that first step might be for you or your organization, whether it's a workload migration or just standing up that core infrastructure of subscription, network, and identity. And in that, very, very quickly, we bring you up to speed with what your next steps might be to build that strategy, that roadmap, which we can help you with as well. So in closing, I'm going to put this book out there, and I'm going to be honest, I don't do a lot of business books. I struggle with them because a lot of them are just, I don't know, not very helpful. Or you can boil them down to a couple sentences and you get everything you need out of them. This one's a little bit different. So this is actually a novel, and it's a novel, and so it's a true story, and not a true story, it's a story, fictional story based on DevOps and helping your business win. And if you're in IT, a lot of this will resonate. Essentially, it's about an organization that they have their market-changing Phoenix project that is going to, revolutionize the world, and they're losing market share daily without something like this. And it shows that journey of how they go from that environment of constant failure in politics, where they're at today, to an Agile DevOps environment and getting there. And cloud is in it, and other things are in it. And like I said, I don't recommend a lot of books, but if you want a relatable story without all the dry business jargon, this is a good one to get a good understanding of how an organization can operate going forward in the cloud. So I guess that last that book is kind of one of my favorites. And so with that, let me say thank you. If you would like to go deeper or get some of this content or talk further about your opportunities in your organization of moving to cloud and how we can move it to you and move you through that process in a pragmatic approach, please get a hold of us and contact us. On here is our website, my email address, as well as my LinkedIn information if you'd like to get a hold of me there as well. And with that, we'll take a few minutes, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Hannah's here who will help me see those questions if there are any, so now would be the time if you have any. Okay, so if there, without any questions, we'll wrap it up. If this will be made a recording in the future, so we'll have it and send it out to you if you'd like to share it with your organization, with your team. And again, if you have any questions in general and you want to contact us, feel free. We're happy to answer and talk about anything that you may have or challenges you may have in your organization in going to cloud or existing in the cloud today. So with that, we will wrap up the webinar, and thank you very much for joining us.